Welcome, friends. Welcome, everybody, to our conversation with Mateo Askaripour. We're going to get started in just a moment, so we'll wait for a couple more folks to get logged on, connected to the audio, but you are in the right place, so thank you for joining us this afternoon. Let's get started in about 60 seconds. All right, I think we have a good critical mass to get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Jessica Bino. I'm the Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer of Pencil. And on behalf of Pencil, we are thrilled to welcome our educators, volunteers, and practitioners to this incredibly special program this afternoon. We are really privileged to have Mateo Askaripour join us for a conversation today about his experience as a young man of color growing up in New York City and how that really has shaped his writing and his career. And we're doubly fortunate and blessed today to have Principal Uche Njoku joining us to moderate this conversation with Mateo. Uche is the principal of John Jay High School in Brooklyn and a really valuable partner to Pencil and thought partner, and just really excited for these two men to have a conversation about how educators can really be preparing young people of color for their next steps in their journey towards success. So with that, and the noises outside my window on 10th Avenue here, I'm gonna turn it right over to Uche and Mateo to jump into the conversation and really encourage everybody listening to throw your questions in the chat and get really, interactive as the moments come and feed us. So thank you again. And Uche, Mateo, I'll turn it right over to you.
Thank you. Mateo, my brother, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, man. Now that I'm here with you, with everyone else who joined, I'm just super excited and thankful. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm very excited for this opportunity. I not only did I read the book, I was engrossed. So I'm ready to have a conversation. This is for our audience. This is going to be very non-traditional in the sense that it's really going to be a conversation. Yep. So I'm going to start off by asking you a question. And the question is, who is Mateo at 16 years old? What is his passions? What did he see for his future?
At 16?
At 16.
At 16, what were my passions? Hanging out with friends as much as possible, trying to enjoy life, trying to not get dragged down by the less pretty aspects of being a high school student. I was ambitious. I was also at that age a little selfish. I enjoyed sports. I enjoyed being challenged. But again, I was lacking in self-awareness in certain regards. And I had high hopes for myself, but I wasn't sure how that would exactly materialize. When I was 16, that's actually when I left high school. I left a year early because where I grew up, and Jessica mentioned New York City. I did spend a lot of time in New York City after 16, but I primarily grew up on Long Island. For me, I wanted to get out of there as soon as possible, just to keep it real. So I left high school at 16, and then I matriculated at NYU. And me being this young guy, now I'm like living in the city because I wasn't commuting. I was one of those first generation students or young folks where my parents were like, okay, yeah, Sally Mae, you know, which is now Navient. So I was like, click, 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 not knowing that years later, I was going to have to pay. So I was living in a dorm and just trying to find my community within the city.
Wow. It's, I didn't expect that answer because I also finished school quite early. I graduated at 15.
Wow.
And I turned 16 before my freshman year in college. So that matriculation to a whole new world and being young and, you know, and I did it from LA to Rochester, New York. So,
wow. Well, you grew up in LA?
I grew up in LA. Yeah. Inglewood.
Okay. What part?
Inglewood.
Inglewood. Let's go. Yeah. There's a rapper named D Smoke from Inglewood who I really like. I'm
not familiar with Dip Smoke. Okay. I'm gonna have to look him up.
He's an educator as well. Yeah.
Okay. I'm definitely gonna have to look him up now. So what I find interesting from your response is, because I'm trying to explore the main character in the book.
Yes.
Black Buck, Darren. What's the motivation there? Because he from what you just said, sounds a lot like you. Like, you know, there's a lot of connections there. And I made an attempt to not explore deep into your background. So sure, I did my best to not watch any other interviews. I just wanted to really engage you, because there's so much in this character that reminds me of my students and myself. So many different levels, especially here with this occasion being really around educators.
Mm-hmm.
So how much of that of Darren is Mateo?
That's typically question number one. And I appreciate the way that you asked it, because an hour or two ago, I did an event. It was a UK based event. Black Buck came out on May 27th in the UK. And this moderator eviscerated Darren, basically saying that she hated him. And then she said, how much is Darren and me alike? And I said, well, now, I mean, I don't know what to say. But the honest answer is that I'm not Darren, right? But we do share some similarities in terms of our ambition, in terms of our desire, at least Darren's desire in the latter or the last third of the book, to help uplift other people and uplift other people who look like him. In terms of having been activated by someone else, in my own life, I was activated by an older man when I was working in the world of startups and sales as well, who really believed in me and who made me believe that I could change the world. And like Darren, I ended up losing myself. But I was never too far gone for redemption. And that is also a theme in this book. And I think that is a theme that is important for younger people to also receive and contemplate about how the mistakes or the so-called mistakes that we make in life never can derail us too far from being able to come back and change and grow. And I wish that was instilled more in me as a younger person, because growing up, right, you asked about who I was when I was 16. I more so had a fixed mindset where if I wasn't good at something, well, just not good at that thing, got to do something else. Instead of when I got to college, I adopted the growth mindset of not good at that thing. Great, work. You can grow, you can become better. So in terms of Darren, though, I'm so happy that you said that you can see parts of yourself in him and that you can see parts of your students in him, because I did want him to be relatable. You know, we're not going to, maybe we will go into the plot, but Darren in the beginning of this novel is working as a shift supervisor at Starbucks. This is probably a primarily New York City audience. So he was valedictorian of Bronx Science. We know what that means.
And I worked at Bronx Science, so it was just funny.
There you go. Okay. So we know what that means, even though some folks who read the book have a gripe with that for different reasons, but we know what that means. But that was 4 years in the past from where the story picks up. So he's no longer in his heyday of this guy should have been the next Messiah or the next Steve Jobs or something. And a question pops up into people's mind of, Mateo, why is he wasting his time as a shift supervisor at Starbucks when he was valedictorian of Bronx Science? Now, maybe not everyone can relate to that type of setting or context, but I think that many of us can relate to feeling as though we're not fully living into our potential or fully living into our greatness or fully living into embracing our superpowers. So that's a win for me for you to say that he's relatable.
I really want to explore the book from the vantage point of the 16-year-old, the 15-year-old, the 17-year-old in my classrooms in my school. Mm-hmm. The book also reads like a sales manual, you know, but but that's a step for a lot of our kids who down the road. Yeah. But for a young person reading this book, especially during this time right now, with all the things that are happening, this battle over critical race theory and all these things happening, this book almost, as I'm reading it, I'm thinking to myself, like, oh my goodness, it's all these connections to things that are happening right now and a sense of identity. My high school is in Parksville, Brooklyn. A lot of my kids are from Bed-Stuy, you know, so as you're describing these spaces, I'm like, okay, I see it. You know, these are like the Wally Cats and the different characters, the Jasons, the gargoyles in the corners of the streets, whether in New York City or even where I grew up in LA, these are fixtures, you know, and one of the things that I really want to explore, and because I definitely don't want to, you know, give away major parts of the book, because I definitely feel this is a book that needs to be read from cover to cover and really be inhaled. There's a space in there where I'm looking at Darren and I'm thinking about some of my students right now who are brilliant, you know, and they're brilliant in their own ways. And and as an educator, I look at them and I say to them, I'm so excited about the future, the potential you have. Yes. And also I'm afraid for them because the spaces that Darren finds himself in the book, you know, in the startup, are spaces that I came up in a time before the whole startup craze, but my first job was in sales out of college, you know, and I was literally the only Black person, you know, male or female in my sales team, and the hoops I had to jump through just to prove myself to be good enough, and losing yourself in that space. Like I'm reading the book, it feels such a cautionary tale.
That's exactly what I was literally just thinking that.
So I want to know, like, what is, but at the same time, it's like, but it's a lot of good that came out of it as well.
Yes.
So like, what is it that you want young people to get out of it? And also teachers as well who are teaching this book. Because I'm telling you right now, this is going to be in my library in my school for sure. Copies for a class. You know, but my thing is, what is, as the author and as you're sitting there, you're writing this, how far do you want this to go with the students, you know, especially that cautionary tale space, you know?
This is just like our last conversation. For folks who don't know, you know, Uche and I, we spoke before this last week or the week prior, and we were getting into it just like this, that we had to be stopped by the folks at Pencil because it wasn't the main event. And just like then, I have so much that I want to say that would stretch beyond the time that we have. So maybe we'll do a round 2 at another point. But let's first start off with my thoughts or my hopes for younger people reading this book. And when I say younger, I'm talking 15 and up, basically. I want them to not be able to put it down. I want them to have their hearts beating. So they say, I need to know how this ends, because I am so, to use the word that you used in the beginning, so engrossed, right? When I was writing this book, I was thinking about some people that I grew up with that I don't know if they've ever read a book for pleasure. And I was thinking, I want to write a book so engaging that those people who rarely, if ever, pick up a book will pick this up and need to finish it, will be so engaged that they need to figure out how it ends. So that's my first goal. 2 is it is a cautionary tale. And I think that it's critical, if young people read this, to understand that what happened to Darren and also what he does, because he's not just a victim. We make choices in this life, right? And the choices that we make matter. Both of those things could happen to a lot of us if we don't come from these certain backgrounds. If all of a sudden, like Darren, you know, someone's going from making $19,000 a year to $65,000 overnight, to a company with a couple hundred people. Almost none of them look like you. These values start to get imprinted on you, and you don't want to stick out because a lot of these environments are predicated on assimilation, right? On fitting with the crowd and on losing the best parts of what make you you. So I hope that young people will read the book and say, man, it really sucks that Darren lost himself in this way. I don't ever want to lose myself in this way. While at the same time, understanding that Darren gained things as well that helped him be the person he needed to be to affect change. It is not easy. It is not like, okay, there are these 3 themes in the book. That's it. There's an unraveling. Because like you were saying before, Uche, he loses himself to devastating consequences, but he also gains a lot at the same time. So which is which? I want to put the responsibility on the reader, regardless of their age, to ask themselves, who am I in this narrative? Who am I in the greater narrative of life? And educators hopefully have experienced the same thing while reading the book. And at best, they can say, I've experienced things like this as well. Let's discuss. At worst, which still isn't bad, is I haven't really experienced a lot of this. This is what I was feeling as I was reading it. Let me facilitate a conversation and hear how you all were feeling as well. And hopefully something good will come out of it.
I want to explore one of those feelings that I got from the book. Definitely there's, actually, let me go back. I remember being a young person about to leave home to go to college. You know, I turned 15 June 11th, and I was on a college campus literally the following week.
How'd you get here? A plane, a train?
I flew by myself. I was, just by myself. Like it was,
Were you excited?
I was terrified. I'm leaving my hood to go to upstate New York, and I was like, is there even any hoods up there? But I'm coming to a space. So I just remember my father saying to me, and my mother as well, and they're, like I think you'd appreciate this, being a child of immigrants and ethnic folks.
Yes.
I remember my mother and father telling me, and I like to do their accents. They were like, Uche, please, when you go there, you have to be better than everyone there. Sometimes you might have to be 10 times better. And it was very true, because I walked into a space where kids had attended some of the best high schools, and they were coming from affluence, and I'm literally coming from Section 8 housing in LA, and I'm questioning, do I have the right to even be here?
Yeah. And
the reason I say that, because Darren goes through that.
Yes.
In the beginnings of his employment with someone, and the whole notion of being the token Black person, because he's the only one there. I know for a fact, some of my kids would say, oh, he's sold out, especially when things like, his sales team being called NWA and the ribbing and the jokes and the overt racial, tones, not even undertones, straight like in your face that he goes through. And how would you say, but also you have a background in sales and being in these spaces.
Yes.
What would you say to a young person as far as they read something like this and they're not thinking to themselves, nah, I'm good. Nah, I'm not. If that was me, I'd have snuffed them, But when you're pursuing excellence and trying to be, in a lot of cases, a representative for something greater than yourself, how do you manage that? How do you maintain a sense of dignity in that space?
Another we got to start doing like Uche questions, because there's so many things that I want to tackle. The first would be careful of the success that you chase, right? So many of us, especially young folk, are being handed these definitions of success that might not actually resonate with them. We need to ask them, what does success mean to you? No one ever really asked me that when I was younger. And I've seen so many people fall into the trap, and this happens in the book, of chasing this very American version of success: money, power, influence, right? Which is dangerous, if we prioritize all of those things over being a good person, however you define it, giving back to your community, raising a family. There are people who have come to me over the past couple of years and say, Mateo, I don't want to be rich. I just want to raise a family and be a good mother or a good father. And that for me is a form of wealth. But in the eyes of our society, they would be giving up. They would be a failure for not chasing the American dream. So I think that it's critical that we ask our students and ourselves, honestly, what does success mean to us? And then what are the steps that we can take to achieve that? Now, in terms of the reactions to the book, when it comes to, let's say, Black folks specifically, there are two camps. There is the first camp, as you said, that they read this book and they said, I would have caught a body, right? I would have snuffed someone. Like I would have never let this fly if people were to speak to me this way, which I understand. And I'm happy that they're having that reaction, because I truly believe that this book is a mirror and it reflects someone's reality and their own thinking, their emotional state back to them. That's what I wanted. But then there is the other camp who say, Mateo, this book triggered me because I have been that person. I have been the only one or one of the few. And I know what it's like to just take it until I make it. As you were saying, Uche, the pursuit of excellence. And many of us are taught to just shut up and take it. But the line, right, of how much we're willing to take gets pushed and pushed and pushed to where we no longer understand where we are in relation to that line. So this book for some of those people is triggering and difficult, but at the same time, it's empowering because they remember that they are not the only person. They are not the only people who wouldn't catch a body and are just silent. And this book also isn't a condemnation of that. But the last thing I'll say is there's a question at the end of the book that's very important for any reader, especially a young reader, is, was this all worth it? And it's on them to answer that. I can't answer that for them. It's heavy, man. As we're talking about it, I'm like, whoa, thinking about it from a young person's perspective, it could raise a lot in them, which I think would be a good thing.
Yeah, I agree, because again, in reading this book, I read it from two viewpoints. Mm-hmm. The things in there that triggered me.
Yeah.
Especially what you just spoke about. You know, I'm part of the latter group who said, wow, in my journey towards where I'm at right now, through University of Rochester, Columbia University, becoming a principal, and being perceived as this super successful educator.
Yes.
But there are a lot of turning the cheeks that I had to do.
Same.
A lot of biting of the tongue, you know, and sometimes you wonder, was it worth it? And I'm the kind of person who would, with my students, I share them with my story. I tell them, like, listen, these are the things, this is my cautionary tale. These are the things that I went through, and I want to help you avoid a lot of these, you know, pitfalls. But in reading this, then it definitely, you know, I can't help but feel like it made me question my level of selloutness, if that makes any sense. But I'm just like, wow, was that selling out in those spaces where things were said and you stayed quiet because you didn't want to be that person? You know, you didn't want to be the person to ruffle feathers. You didn't want to stop your success because you figure, if I can get far enough, I can change things. You know, and it's interesting because in the book, Darren gets far enough, but by accident, we have the happy campers. You know, which was, I mean, at least in my opinion, it wasn't intentional to begin with, but it became what it became, and he was a big part of that. Why are the happy campers important?
Yeah. But before I get to that, I want to just note that from my own experience, there's a difference between selling out and doing what you need to do to survive. In a lot of these environments, it is a matter of survival. Sometimes physical, more often than not, probably not, right? But oftentimes mental and emotional and spiritual. So anyone that brings up the concept of selling out, I would just urge them to be kind, to be kind to other people, especially if you haven't been in these types of scenarios. Even the other day, I have someone very close to me who was at a wedding. This is going to be a short tangent. Who was at a wedding, and he was one of 3 Black people at this wedding with maybe 100 people. And he has locks, and he felt a tugging. And he turned around, and there was a white woman, and she said, "Don't mind me. I just really like your hair." And he laughed. He just had to laugh. And then an hour or so later, the same thing happened. And she's like, "I really just love your hair." And she had a friend with her to look at his hair. And he explained to me how hurt he felt afterwards because he didn't say anything, because he didn't do anything. And I said, "Listen, man, try to be kind with yourself, because in those scenarios, your subconscious could be playing to the fact that it's a matter of survival. And that if you make a scene and there are 97 other people who don't look like you, it cannot end well, especially when alcohol and other things are involved." You see what I'm saying? So that's what I would say to someone who brings up the concept of selling out. Now, when it comes to the idea of the happy campers, more than a literary device of like making Darren seem like a good person again and making this into a story of redemption, I wanted readers to understand what I brought up at the beginning of the conversation, that I truly believe that when we lift other people up, our arms get stronger as well, and what that could look like. And what happens in the book is only one version of it. And in fact, I'll be honest, it's an incomplete version. I don't want to spoil things and I want to go further there, but I don't want to spoil things. But what happens at the end of the book and what Darren creates is partially incomplete. It's not just let us help young people of color infiltrate America's tech startup sales teams, because the majority of them are owned and run by white men, right? The goal isn't just to enrich these white men at the top, but it is to get in, to learn what we can. And if you have it in you, get out, start your own thing, or stay in, get your bread, and then help build up your community, or stay in, get your bread, and don't do anything. Like it's not on me to say what someone should or shouldn't do. I had an editor read an early version of Black Buck, a non-Black person, and she said, "Mateo, I don't get it. Why didn't Jason just become like Jay-Z? You know, he moved from doing this type of thing on the corner. Why didn't he turn into Jay-Z and just become this beacon of hope for his community and this, that, and the other?" And I said, "Listen, Name, I can't exactly answer that, but sometimes people make it through and out of adversity and they don't have it in them to be Martin Luther King. They just got to take care of themselves and other people." So, man, the more we talk about it, and I've probably 100, 120 conversations over the last months, but the more we talk about it from the context of a young person, there's so much to unravel. And I think that places a responsibility on the educator to be there to help unravel it in a healthy way.
If I could say this to and to educators who are listening, that is the real work. You know, actually being able to unravel it for yourself first, because there are a lot of things in here there's a lot of things in this book that I know a lot of students of color are going to read and say, "I totally identify with this," just from their young lives thus far, you know. But there's also a lot of things in there that can be terrifying. Like, what do you do when you're finding stuff in these spaces that you might feel like you have no control, you know? And it's powerful, because also as I'm reading it, I'm asking myself, did Mateo borrow from some historical figures in some of his characters? You know, because of course the happy campers, I'm sorry, I felt a little bit of Snick in there. I felt a little bit of the Black Panther Party in there. These young people who are saying we're going to do things a little bit different. But then even with Rose and Jason, their move was like straight up like, okay, nah, we're going. It's funny, but at some point in time, I couldn't get the image out of my head of Jason and Rose in black leather jackets with berets on. Like, no, we got this. Yes. I'm thinking it's very interesting, because one thing I think is very powerful about teaching is being in that cross-disciplinary space, connecting literacy with historical context as well. So I'm reading this, I'm seeing, okay, Darren is becoming more of like a Fred Hampton type figure here, in the later half, in that redemption space, but incomplete in many ways. You know,
you might have a question, but I sort of want to address.
Go ahead, please go ahead. Go ahead.
You hit the nail on the head. There are levels to this that at this point, thousands of people have read this book, and there's so many things that people have never brought up. Maybe because I had woven it too well into the material where you couldn't tell what's what. But I'm happy that that's the vibe that you're getting, because it was it was like November 2017 when I first had the idea for a book like this, and it wasn't in this version. I had just watched this Netflix documentary on the Black Panthers, and I said, I'm about to write a book about a group of elite Black salespeople who become domestic terrorists and blow up buildings. That was my first idea for this, to be completely honest. So then I said, all right, chill out, slow down. Maybe that's not the best route for this. But that is coursing through the latter half of the book for sure. The ideology of Black empowerment and the Black Panther Party. Even without giving away spoilers, there is a part where there are posters that were reminiscent of posters made back then regarding Huey Newton, right? So there are posters, and then there are the people who are more militant than others, like Jason and Rose, are like, no. We're not doing any of this non-violent type of stuff. We're about to get, gutter in here. And then there's other people who are looking to be pacifists and this, that, and the other. So there is that aspect for sure. But to take it one level deeper, and I typically don't share these things, but you got me going. So some of the names of the people in the Happy Campers are the exact names of previously enslaved individuals who ran away, right? Mm-hmm. So Jacob Green, he was an enslaved runaway. Rose Butler, Rose was named after a 19-year-old enslaved woman who was hanged in Washington Square Park. That's true, supposedly for arson. And you see that fiery mentality and emotion in the character of Rose.
Especially when she was at the park and he had to hold her, he flipped the table.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Even the meetings, the name for the meetings of the Happy Campers, they call them hush harbors. Right. For those who don't know, hush harbors were the names of the gatherings of enslaved individuals so that they could practice religion and talk. So there is a lot of history interwoven in here. And even if not everyone catches it, they're still reading it and it's still getting in there, you know?
As we're talking, I'm literally going through my notes here, and Huey P. Newton is on. I'm like, I gotta ask, is there a connection there? And then there's a piece here that I wrote, and I wasn't sure where I was going with it. I wrote in here, education in the secret of darkness, because of that initial training he's giving to those, to first with Brian, then Rose, and the campers the numbers start to grow. They always meet at nighttime, and I thought to myself, I've been sharing this with my community because it's the month of June and Juneteenth.
Yep.
And I always remind my teachers that it always dawns on me the fact, as a Black principal in 2021, then going back 100 years ago, that wouldn't have been possible. If I go back another 100 years, it would have been illegal.
Yep.
For me to even be able to read or write. And the fact that for him to and I don't want to make the assumption by saying for him too, but the fact that I think it wasn't lost on me, the fact that they met at night. It was secretive, and it was almost like, and I'm thinking about the college when the frats and sorors are pledging, and everything's done at night, everything's done in secret. People are running around, and but you see how the characters become more and more confident, and they're growing, and I have to say, Brian is one of my favorite characters.
Why?
At first it was, it almost became Trey, but I had to go back to Brian for reasons, of course. Yeah. But the thing with Brian is the fact that his disability, I grew up a chronic stutterer, and the fact that Darren does something that I always tell my students is very, very important. That level of kindness you give to other people. Even though there were parts there where things kind of went awry, but the way that Darren cared about Brian, you know, made me it made me happy, but also kind of made me sad, because I remember being a kid who stuttered chronically. Like, I was singled out, you know, it was made fun of, and being bullied was very easy.
Yeah.
And Darren, for all his ability and his finesse and everything else, you know, chose at different points to be kind, to be kind in his own way.
Yes.
To Brian. And again, as I'm going through the characters in the book, I'm seeing my students and members of my community in these characters, from Wally Cat to Brian to even Trey. Like, I see all these things, and I would say the thing that I love most about the books are the character developments. The characters in there are so authentically New York, you know. And I can say that us also hood is authentically hood, but really for New York, it was like, okay, I can really see these people in these spaces.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you for that, because I think it's something that's very important, because a lot of books are being written and kids don't see themselves in it, you know. And this feels like this was written from the inside out versus outside in, you know. Wow. And like you said, like the person who said about, why couldn't Jason just be like Jay-Z? Clearly you're not quite aware about how 1 in a trillion that was to have a Jay-Z come from that kind of space, you know. And especially knowing that, let's be honest here, I've met people who are like incredibly brilliant on the corners, but they're still on the corners.
Yes.
You know, so I think that in itself is like something that just stuck with me, and now I lost my question in that space.
No, it's all good. I mean, and take a second, but when we're talking about the happy campers and what happens at night, it just makes me think about how some people say, if Darren was so smart, why would he do certain things this way? Or why would he subject people to things like this, that, and the other? And I'm not giving away these points because for anyone who hasn't read the book yet, I don't want to ruin them. But people seem to forget that Darren is 22, 23 for the majority of this novel. He's young. He's young. Of course, he's going to do wild things that don't make sense, because he is now tasked, sort of on accident, as you said, which is very accurate, with leading a group of people and a group of young people to, I'm not going to say the promised land, but to, someone was calling me, but to betterment, you know. And he's young. He's figuring out what that means for himself. So that's not to excuse his behavior, but just to remind people about the youth in this book. And hopefully it is something that young people, well, I already know it is, because sometimes they email me, but it makes me happy to know that they are seeing themselves, or a future version of themselves, in this book to a certain extent, because 22 is not a large distance from 16 or 17 than 35 or 40 or some of these other narratives.
I want to read something to you, and hopefully I don't butcher this, but these are your words, and you know.
Well, they're yours too, man. You read the book. So.
And I am still a long life stutterer. So here, I'm going to read this short paragraph. It says, "I felt like shit. Red had given me the opportunity of a lifetime, but it came at the cost of my freedom. And it was then, as I walked out of his office past the hundreds of salespeople laughing as they saw their fearless leader fall, that I realized it was freedom that had motivated me from the very beginning. Not money, power, the need to prove myself, or even to make Ma proud, but the freedom to breathe where I want, when I want, how I want, and with whom I want in my beautiful brown skin." Bro, that broke me.
Wow.
I read that and I was like, I had to pause. I had to walk away from the book and just say, okay, you know. And this is my first time getting to speak. I've read a lot of books in my lifetime, you know, and I've met very few of the writers who've written those books. So I want to take the opportunity to ask a question that I always wanted to ask writers. Why? Why? What is, and however you want to respond to that, because when I read that, I said to myself, why did he write it that way? And why has he made me feel this way that I have to walk away? And as a soon to be 45-year-old tomorrow, have to like go sit in the corner and hold myself and just be like, Uche, calm down and breathe, you know, because there's so much in there. So I just want to ask the question, why?
Well, happy early birthday, brother. I'm happy to know that you will have made it another year. I'm happy to have met you during this time. Wishing you all the best. Why? Yeah, that is a big question. It's funny because I'm thinking about the process of writing. I don't know if that was, maybe it was in the first draft, but it was through writing the book that I got to better understand Darren and all of the other characters and their motivations. If you were to have asked me when I began writing the book, why is Darren doing all of this? I don't think that I would have answered freedom. It was through better understanding him, through remaining open to the character himself. And now this is an aspect of craft, I guess, for anyone that's interested in writing. It was through me remaining open and getting out of my own way as the author. And fully, I can't even say putting myself in his position, but allowing him to tell me why he was doing what he was doing, why he was experiencing these things that then allowed me to put it to the page. A lot of this book was me getting out of the way. And I know that this is starting to sound a little like, you know, out there, but that's how I wrote it. I was hoping that I would put what I wanted to put on the page and then the characters would correct it, draft over draft. And after I got to know them more, reading it aloud, thinking about the people I've seen in my own life. For me, and you asked this, how much of me is in the book, in my own experience? It's hard to say because I feel like the entire book is suffused with some aspect of my experience or my own history, even if I didn't directly experience it in the way that it is conveyed in the book. But what I can say without a shadow of a doubt is every feeling in the book is a feeling that I've experienced myself. And during the passage that you read so beautifully and powerfully, with your gravelly voice, man, I was like, whoa, he should have done the audiobook. That sounded great. You were almost getting me emotional as you were reading, to be completely honest. That aspect is something that came from my own desire to be free. I worked in the world of startups and sales. And when I eventually quit, I quit for many reasons, but part of it was freedom. I felt trapped. I felt enslaved in my own way. And I was young, I was 25, but I vowed to never feel that way again. So I suppose that it resonates with people or resonated with you in that way because you've experienced that as well, of feeling trapped and wanting to be free, whether through someone freeing you or you freeing yourself.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. It is 4:45, so I just want to make sure that there's time. I think we can go for another hour, but I just want to make sure that
I didn't even know how much time had passed.
I know. So are we good for questions now, or do we just keep going?
Yeah, you can keep going. If anyone has any questions.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Okay.
If anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself, or you can put them in the chat. But yeah, keep going.
Yes, please don't be shy. We're here for you. As you could tell, we can and will keep it going. But if you have questions, please ask them. It's a pleasure to be able to answer them.
Most definitely. One of us.
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say congratulations, and I haven't had a chance to read the book yet, but I'm picking up the book. I'm really looking forward to reading it, and congratulations and many more.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time in advance to read it.
Thank you for that.
Can I ask a question?
Please do, please.
I believe that things happen for a reason. And although I was looking forward to this, I haven't read the book yet, but I just ordered it from Amazon. I've been toying with the idea of writing a book myself. So my question to you is, I'm having issues of how to get started. what headspace are you in to say, okay, I'm going to sit down and do that, and I'm going to do it with fidelity?
Well, first of all, I hope that you write your book. Thank you for ordering Black Buck, and thank you for the question. Oh yeah, it's tough. With Black Buck, it was the third manuscript that I'd worked on, right? I don't have a writing background. At first, the first manuscript I began was a way out for me when I was working in the world of sales and startups. I needed to get out of it in terms of my headspace, if not yet physically. That book didn't work out in terms of many things, but in terms of me getting an agent or a book deal or things like that. I just didn't know what I was doing, but I think that it was good in that it had a lot of energy. The second book that I wrote was a rewrite of the first, and I'd learned more about writing. I learned more about the industry to a certain extent, and I'd read a book that helped me immensely called Plot and Structure by a man named James Scott Bell. And with that second book, I said, okay, it's tighter. I know what I'm doing. This is going to get me on. No, it didn't work because there wasn't any real level of fidelity, as you were saying. This was me trying to tell a good story, but more so trying to get on. So when those two things didn't work out, I said, forget it. Forget pandering to this industry. Forget trying to fit into nice, neat boxes of how a writer should write or how a writer should be. I'm going to write the book that I want in the way that I want for the people I wanted to resonate with. So I had this fire burning in me. And I did hope that I would get an agent and that the book would be published, but those were no longer priorities 1 and 2. They were 2 and 3 or 3 and 4. Telling a book that felt true to me, telling a book that was fun to write and would hopefully be fun to read, a book that would be complex and challenging was at the forefront of my mind, and a book that would especially resonate with young Black and brown folk. So whenever I got stuck, I thought about the one Black guy that I saw in a recruiter's office or a recruiting company's office that I shared with them when I was consulting, and how over the course of working there for 4 months, I'd never seen a Black person walk in there, right? Until I saw this one guy. I was thinking about him. Now this book could probably help him. I was thinking about myself. I was thinking about other people, regardless of how they identify, that this book, if it got into their hands, would help them feel less alone and would empower them. So that's what kept me going. But how I came to the page every day, I don't know if we have enough time, but I have a very extensive routine that would seem maniacal to a lot of people. But the gist is that the night before I plan to write, I tell myself I'm going to write in some form or fashion, so that when I wake up, there's no question I'm going to do it. I meditate for a little bit. My drink of choice is a drink called yerba mate. It comes from South America, so that gives me the necessary, caffeine jolt. I try to be playful. I dance a little bit. I eat the same breakfast. And I also have an inspiration folder with folks like, Nina Simone, Maya Angelou, Fred Hampton, Malcolm X, Dave Chappelle, Oprah, Nipsey Hussle, people like that inspire me, that I can commune with. And then I come to the page with this energy, with this inspiration. And that's not to say that it works every day. Some days it doesn't. More often than not, it does, because I figured it out for myself. But when it doesn't, I go into nature. And especially with the second book that I'm writing, that isn't just pouring out of me like Black Buck, I try to be kind to myself. So that's what gets me in the headspace. And also just knowing at the end of the day, if I don't write the book that I want to write, no one's going to do it for me. And not all of us are going to make it to Uche's age. So I'm trying to get this out. You know what I'm saying? That's what I'm on.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. That's been extremely helpful.
Wrong mic. Okay. Thank you for that, because I think I have a lot of students in my school who are also aspiring writers. So I find myself, they're always asking, like, how do I? And I'm like, I'm not a writer. I create content, but I'm not a writer. But I think it's very important that you share those routines, because I think those routines are things that people often don't think about. They just think, I'm just going to pull out a pen and paper, start writing. And I think it's very important to create that headspace. I love the fact you say about being kind to yourself, because often, especially in these times, we're brutal to ourselves. Like if if we don't do the smallest thing, all of a sudden it's like, oh, I failed, you know,
Yes.
and we spend more time moping than creating. So I think that's very powerful. I see a question here in the chat. What advice would you give to young people of color entering the workforce for the first time? What if there is no one on their team who looks like them and they face microaggressions? Also, how can educators support students to bring up such instances to them? And this is coming from Sushi.
Thank you, Sushi. Real quick, again, you just made me think of many things just from your last comment. Something that's in this book, and I think is also important to discuss, not here because we don't have the time, but the difference between an employee and a person. So many of these organizations, or when you get into the workplace, treat people as employees and not as people. I did that when I was a young 24-year-old, you know, making money and managing 30 people. Sometimes people would come to me with issues, and my naive self would say, great, pick up the phone. Picking up the phone will solve all of your problems right now. Anything that you're bringing to me that has nothing to do with that whiteboard right now, it's just extra, you know, pick up the phone. That is an error that many of us are taught, regardless of if you're in the workplace or not. So you mentioning how we need to be kind to ourselves now, because so many of us are focused on productivity and focus more on what we do rather than who we are. It really resonated. So thank you for that. Sushi, the advice that I would, and I have, thanks to Pencil and other organizations that have brought me in to speak with young people, is that if something doesn't feel right, then it's probably not. You know, do not allow yourself to be gaslit by other people when there are real issues at hand, especially if there are folks who don't look like you in those places. You are the expert on you. You are the expert on how you feel. Trust yourself. 2 is, I would say, not to feel as though, and this is tough, but not to feel as though they represent everyone who looks like them. We are all individuals. No group of people, whether defined by sexual orientation, race, or religion, are a monolith. So you can just speak to the best of your ability and your own experience. And, you know, you don't have to be a translator. You don't have to be a tour guide into people who look like you. All you have to do is represent yourself in the way that you want to be represented. 3, and then I'll get to the last part, is what I found in my life is that when I embrace that which makes me different, I've been more successful, right? When I think about my own history, when I think about where I come from, and I embrace those things, not just accept or tolerate, which is a word that I really can't stand when people speak about today's, you know, we just have to tolerate one another in this nation. Like, tolerate? What are you talking about? All right, we should be working not just towards acceptance, but I think embracing and loving one another. But anyway, when I've embraced those aspects of myself, I've been able to come to my work with a clearer headspace, with more happiness and more vitality. In terms of how can educators support students who bring up such instances to them, is listening, asking questions. If you can relate, then relating to them and letting them know that they're not alone. If you can't relate, being honest about it. Because if you try to give out some advice, and I know you all know this if you're an educator, if you try to give out some advice, kids will let you know that is not resonating with them. Even if they say, yes, got it, thank you. So many kids can act, you know? So I would say that if you can't relate, be honest about it and just try to understand and just try to not automatically present a solution. A friend taught me something a decade ago when she said, sometimes when I bring up things to you, I don't want a solution. I just want you to listen. And I would imagine that young folks, in some instances, not all, want the same. But I'm not an educator. I'm not in your position. You all have a much more holistic view of what it's like to be you. I can just speak from my own experience as someone who is me and was younger than where I am now.
I look for any more questions. We have a few minutes left. Oh, okay, here we go. Another question. This is from from Victoria Hines. For Black writers, do you think that there is racial bias from certain publishing companies?
Without a doubt. Oh yeah, without a doubt. The New York Times put out a report that 95% of books published in America from 1940 to 2018 were written by white authors. 95%. And there are many reasons for this. One being that publishing is overwhelmingly white in terms of the decision makers, the agents. I have a white agent. The editors, my agent is a woman of, my editor is a woman of color, but editors, they're largely white, right? And I'm not going to excuse them, but you can imagine that they read a book by Uche, you know, and they're talking about some highly intelligent 15-year-old from Inglewood who went to Rochester. I've never heard of that myself, right? As a black man, but you have someone else from, no offense, what I'm about to say, from like Greenwich, Connecticut, who's an editor at Random House or HarperCollins or something. They're more often not going to say, I don't resonate with this. And they'll send a response to your agent saying, pass, I just didn't feel as strongly about the material as I needed to be in order to run with it, right? We know what people say. So Victoria, most definitely. And we've seen that if they want to publish books by Black and brown writers or people who don't fit the quote unquote status quo, that sometimes they'll want it to be filled with trauma. For me, it was very important to not have Black Buck be 400 pages of tragedy and trauma or doom and gloom, even though there is reality in there and very difficult moments. But it would have been inauthentic for me, I believe, in terms of the story that I was telling in my own life, to not include some levity, some humor, triumph, success of what I know to also encompass the Black experience. I mean, Uche, did you laugh? Because there's some wild stuff in the book. Did you laugh?
No, there are some parts in there that it's funny because literally there are parts in there that were hilarious. And again, not to give away any part, but Brian's first day in sales training.
Oh yeah.
I was like,
oh yeah.
I was like, wow. But it to me it was funny because I was like, because I was also in the Marine Corps. So I thought about being in Paris Island. And
you got to write a book. You what? You were in the Marines. You got to write a book.
You know what? One day when I'm able to like get this brain of mine quiet. But there's parts of that I was just like, man, this is so relatable on so many different levels. You know, so
yeah.
Maybe it's just me because I'm a man of a certain age and I've had a lot of experiences. But I was like, yep, I've seen that before happen. There's a question here that is, whoa, it's a good, very good one. So please bear with me. I want to make sure I do justice to the words here. This is from Jessica, from our Jessica. Mm-hmm. She says here, I'm still marinating on your metaphor and inspiration of the Black Panther Party. I'm sorry, make sure I can see this. From your metaphor and inspiration of the Black Panther Party, your reference to domestic, your reference to domestic terrorism. Mm-hmm. In the book, some characters literally treat the happy campers as terrorists for using training in social capital, aka tools white networks have used forever. How can we have conversations with students of color to prepare them for the reality that there are some people out there who may view the success as a serious threat? And okay, so this is something that I've always said to my students. Wow. And I've had people look at me like, okay, you're creating this fear in your heads. But I'm like, no, this is very real. And I tell my students, there are people out there who literally do not want you to be successful.
Without a doubt.
Like you are a threat. To be intelligent, well-spoken, and be a critical thinker, and to be fearless is a threat. And so the question, like, how do you think teachers or educators can talk to kids about that, especially as being someone of color who's been in that space? And like, how do we relay that without seeming like we're crazy and we're just making stuff up in our heads?
Well, what do you say to your students, Uche? I'd be curious to hear.
So I tell my students this, that I tell them this: they don't have to be 10 times better than anyone else.
Mm.
First off, that's such a high expectation to live up to, you know. But that's what I was told as a kid. That's what and as an educator over the years, as a teacher, I've seen principals and administrators tell their kids, you have to be that much better than everybody else. But but my thing, where do you measure better than from?
Yes.
Okay. But I tell them this, you have to always question, ask the why. Why is this happening? What is happening in this space? And be very self-aware. Because just from my own personal experiences, there's been spaces where, like I shared earlier, where I felt like, did I just sell out right now? You know, did I just sit here and hear this joke being told that was super offensive and racially charged, but I laughed and took a sip of my drink and say, well, it's just, you know, social banter, you know? Like, how do you handle those spaces? Yeah. And the other thing too is our kids now are very different from how I was. And even though you might be closer to their age, you know, as far as timeline is concerned, but they're very different now.
Yes.
The pandemic, Black Lives Matter, they're seeing everything. So a lot of them are taking stances of being like, you know what, I'm gonna fix my feet in the ground, and like Toby Inigwe said in a song, try Jesus.
Yeah.
You know, but don't try me. But I'll fight. And that's their stance. And I worry for that. I worry for them because and this is not really a spoiler alert, but in the section of the book where Clyde tells Darren, pretty much, I wish you would.
Yeah.
You know, because I will make sure you're out of here in handcuffs for the most part. You know.
Yes.
And that threat is a real threat. So for me, I tell my students, like, you got to pay attention to what's happening around you, and also have allies and mentors and people you can come back to and ask them, how do I handle the situation? So that you don't find yourself in a position where you lose out on everything you've worked hard for. I didn't have that. I made a lot of mistakes because I didn't have anyone when you're the only one there.
Yeah.
My parents don't understand. They just know you have a great job. Don't mess that up. You live in Malibu. Don't mess that up, you know? And with that being said, it's like, it becomes a very lonely place. So for my students, I tell them, like, listen, have your network of friends, have those mentors. And for a lot of them, I've been that person where they would call me and say, hey, Mr. Njoku, this happened in college. What should I do? Yeah. You know, this happened at my job, or I had an interview and this happened. How should I handle it? You know, and it's funny, but now I'm thinking, do I actually have my own little happy campers going on here? You know,
sounds like it.
But the thing is, a lot of us do, you know, and that network is very, very important. And so that's my response to my students. And a lot of my students are young adults in their 20s now, you know, and a lot of them doing the same thing for others as well.
That's beautiful. And I mean, I would say that as well, in terms of having your support system. And it doesn't have to be large. It could be 3, 4, 5 people that you can always turn to. Having one of those people, or at least someone in your workplace that you can speak with very honestly, and who will listen, and who has been there before, maybe not even in your workplace, but in an adjacent position or industry, to help guide you. I would say be aware of the fact that not everyone wants you to win, but don't focus on it. And I don't know if it, you know, how people would feel about that. It is, be aware of it, of course, but personally for me, and maybe Uche, you would say the same, is you can get lost down a rabbit hole of focusing in this defeatist way of, all of these people want me to fail, so why even try? I'm more of the mind of yes and, not so what, but yes and. Yes, there are people out there who don't want me to win, and I'm going to continue to win and take the steps to help other people win in the face of all of that, because no one's going to stop me. So anyway, that's the gist. And it's more so on how, you know, the crux of this book is being pro and focusing on empowerment rather than anti, or looking to tear other people down. That was the idea that I had burning in me as I was writing it, and hopefully that resonates.
I want to say 2 things. The first thing is, I think that especially for our students who are ready to go to college, you know, some are choosing to go into the workforce, you know, and might face a lot of the things that they, you know, might and will probably face a lot of things that's in this book. But our young people who are about to go who are off to college, especially those who are entering spaces that are so far removed from where they're from.
Yeah.
I experienced this, but I have crazy African parents, so failing was not an option for me. You know,
Yeah.
I was more afraid of my father than what was happening in school. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna fight through this.
Yeah.
But I see a lot of young people over the course of my career who drop out of college, not because the work was too hard, not because they weren't ready, but they find themselves in these spaces with characters like Clyde, and they're like, you know, I can't do this, and they walk away. And I asked them what happened. They're like, it wasn't for me. And that's when I know, okay, it had nothing to do with your ability to do the work. It wasn't for me. You know, what do you say to them? Like for that kid who is about to enter a space, because there's no way to really prepare yourself. You know, like I went to University of Rochester, and literally my freshman class, when I was maybe 50 of us,
Yeah.
and we thought we were a lot of us. Then when the school year started, and there was maybe about 120 Black and brown students out of 3,000 students on campus, we were like, oh snap. This is not Inglewood. This is not Brooklyn. This is not the Bronx. It's a very different space. And I had a lot of friends of mine who literally psychologically couldn't handle it. You know, they couldn't handle the microaggressions. They couldn't handle, and we didn't even know what to call it. You know, the term microaggressions wasn't a thing. You know, we just knew, okay, this was survival. And a lot of kids are still going through that. So what would you say to that kid who's about to go to college and will probably face a lot of these same things, definitely not in the same instance of working for a startup as as a SDR, but going to a space where you might not necessarily be welcomed, you know, and how do you survive that?
Oof. Yeah, that's a heavy one. I would say ask yourself who you are. Ask yourself why you're doing it, why you're going to these places, and hold on to those answers as often as you can. And surround yourself with as many people who you believe will be looking out for you and loving you unconditionally. And also understand that you will fail many times, fail to be the person who you want to be, fail to act with poise in every scenario. And again, be kind to yourself, but understand that it is only on you to decide what is and isn't for you. And if you want something, try not to let anyone get in the way, because they're breathing the same air as you, they're bleeding the same blood as you, and they quite often have the same fears as you. So why let them decide your destiny? That's what I would say, yeah. And hopefully it would resonate.
Thank you. It's time for us to wrap up.
Yeah.
You know, we're 10 minutes over time. I want to close by thanking you so much for this book.
Thank you.
I had emailed you and I shared with you that there's only one other book that I've read, and I'm not saying this, I'm not trying to gaslight you, you know, but there's only one other book that I read that really made me think and really explore myself in the words, and that was Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. And I think this book could be that book for a lot of our young people, and I want to thank you for blessing us with yourself, with a piece of yourself in this book. And there's one more character in this book that I have to say thank you for, and that's Chauncey. Because being West African, Chauncey is my father, my uncles, all the African men that have had a great impact on me, and that soft oracle type, you know, words of encouragement he gave Darren. And I was like, and I thought to myself, I wouldn't be educated right now. It wasn't for one of my uncles who said, "Go ahead and do this." Wow. When everyone told me, "Teach? You want to teach? Teachers are broke. What are you doing?" And I had an uncle who said, "You know what? This is God's work." And that's the only reason I said, okay, I'm going to go ahead and do this. And not thinking that all the years later I would be a principal. And here I am sitting here with you talking about this book. So I want to give a shout out to my late Uncle Stanley and thank you for being the Chauncey in my life. So thank you so much. And to the audience, thank you so much for indulging us in this conversation and allowing us to do our thing here. And for the Uche questions, I've been accused of that. I've been accused of that all my life because I don't know how to keep things simple. But I really appreciate you, brother. Thank you so much.
I'm so grateful for the Uche questions. I'm grateful for you, your energy, your uncle, that has brought us together, and the audience and the folks at Pencil, Marielle, Jessica, Keith. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you, Pencil.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for your time this afternoon. We'll get the full video on YouTube for you to share with any of your colleagues that couldn't make it, and look out for some social media posts. But thanks, Uche. Thanks, Mateo. And thanks, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. Bye.
Thank you. Be well, everyone.
Thank you. All right, Keith.